Zanil Moyo arrived at her son Thabani's big Thanksgiving-style dinner in Johannesburg with a warm smile, hoping for a peaceful family evening. But the moment she stepped inside, she felt something was off. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People exchanged quick glances. Even the smiles felt forced, like everyone was hiding something. Zanil had taught teenagers her whole life. She knew when a room carried strange tension. At the long candlelit dining table, Ayanda, her daughter-in-law, looked unusually bright and cheerful, almost too cheerful. She moved around the table confidently in her gold dress, greeting guests, pretending everything was perfect. Then she stopped in front of Zanil with a pink glass of rose wine. "A special one for you, Mama," she said, pressing the glass into Zanil's hand with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Zanil hesitated. Ayanda never served her drinks personally, and the way she insisted, almost pushing the glass toward her, felt wrong. When Zanil lifted the wine, she caught Ayanda staring directly at her, waiting, watching. A tiny shiver ran through her. Zanil's instincts, the same instincts that had protected countless students over the years, suddenly screamed at her. She laughed lightly, pretending to adjust her napkin, and in that quick moment, she switched her glass with Ayanda's sitting nearby. No one noticed. Not even Ayanda. They all continued talking as if nothing happened, until Ayanda took a sip. Within minutes, Ayanda's face tightened. She grabbed her throat. Then came the coughing, sharp, violent, uncontrollable. Guests jumped up, chairs scraping loudly, screams filling the room. Thabani rushed to his wife, panicked. Zanil sat frozen, her heart pounding. She didn't need anyone to tell her. Something terrible had been planned for her tonight, and she had narrowly escaped it. As Ayanda lay on the floor coughing and gasping for air, the entire dining room spun around Zanil. Guests ran for water. Someone called for an ambulance. Thabani shouted orders no one listened to. But Zanil barely heard any of it. Her mind drifted back to the months leading up to this night, the arguments, the pressure, the strange behavior. And suddenly everything began to make painful, perfect sense. After her husband passed away, Zanil had quietly taken over the management of their old family farm in KwaZulu-Natal. She didn't talk about it much. It was her safe place, her late husband's legacy. But everything changed the day surveyors found rich mineral deposits on the land. Overnight, that simple farm became worth millions. Zanil didn't brag about it. She told only her closest cousin and her lawyer. But somehow, Thabani and Ayanda found out, and that's when the trouble began. At first, they asked nicely, "Mama, why don't you let us handle the farm now? You've done enough. Relax." But when she refused, their tone changed. They wanted her to sign over everything, the land, the mineral rights, the future profits. Zanil always answered the same way. "This is for my grandchildren, not for greed." Ayanda especially couldn't hide her anger. She would roll her eyes, slam cupboards, make snide comments. The respect she once pretended to have for Zanil slowly disappeared. One afternoon, Zanil walked past the kitchen and heard Ayanda on the phone, whispering sharply, "Some people live too long. Honestly, they just get in the way." Those words had stung, but Zanil had forced herself to believe it was just frustration. Nothing serious. Nothing dangerous. She had told herself she was imagining things. She wanted to trust her own son. She wanted to believe her family would never turn on her. But now, watching Ayanda choke on the very drink meant for her, Zanil felt her stomach twist. The shock hit first. Then the guilt, heavy, suffocating. She hadn't meant for Ayanda to drink it. She had only followed her instinct. She had only protected herself. Yet seeing someone suffer because of a plan meant for her, it made her chest tighten. Thabani shouted her name, but she barely heard him. Instead, she replayed every moment. The pressure to sign the papers, the sudden kindness, the forced invitations, the strange tension at the table tonight. All the whispered conversations that stopped when she walked in. The way Ayanda had insisted she drink that particular glass. This wasn't an accident, she realized as her hands trembled in her lap. They wanted me gone. They really wanted me gone. Her heart pounded painfully as the truth settled like a weight she could never shake off. The betrayal wasn't small. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't even financial. They had truly planned to end her life. And if she hadn't trusted that small voice inside her, she would be the one on the floor right now. Ayanda's knees buckled first, then her whole body collapsed to the polished floor with a loud thud that made the entire dining room freeze. Guests screamed. Someone dropped a plate. The music playing softly in the background suddenly felt too cheerful, too wrong for the chaos happening around them. Within seconds, the room transformed into a storm of panic. People rushed forward, tripping over chairs, shouting instructions nobody followed. Thabani knelt beside Ayanda, shaking her shoulders, his voice cracking with fear. "Ayanda! Ayanda, talk to me." But she couldn't. Her breathing was short, desperate, like she was fighting invisible hands around her throat. Someone must have finally dialed emergency services, because moments later paramedics burst into the room. Their bright uniforms and calm, practiced movements stood in sharp contrast to the terrified dinner guests. They kneeled beside Ayanda, checking her pulse, tapping her cheeks, preparing oxygen. The guests huddled together, watching like they were witnessing some tragic theater performance. But instead of comfort, Zanil felt every pair of eyes shift toward her. Then Thabani turned sharply, his face red, eyes wide with rage and fear. "Mom," he snapped, pointing at her shaking hand. "What did you put in her drink?" The words hit her like a slap. A heavy silence fell over the room, followed by the soft, poisonous whispers of Johannesburg's elite family. Men in designer suits leaned toward each other. Women with diamond earrings exchanged looks full of suspicion. Their stares crawled over Zanil like she was some criminal caught in the act. "I didn't put anything," Zanil whispered, her voice calm but her chest burning. She forced herself to stay composed, though her heartbeat felt loud enough for everyone to hear. She had no proof, no video, no witnesses, just her intuition and the unbearable knowledge of what almost happened to her. The paramedics lifted Ayanda onto a stretcher, fitting her with an oxygen mask. Her eyes fluttered weakly, her face pale. They rushed her out of the house, leaving the guests standing in a shocked silence. Zanil stepped back, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of the storm swirling around. But then she heard it, the sentence that tore through her heart more painfully than the attempted poisoning itself. "She must have switched something," Thabani said angrily into his phone. "My mother is capable of anything." Her own son, blaming her, accusing her, believing the worst before even asking what happened. Zanil felt her throat tighten. She wasn't surprised that Ayanda could sink this low. But hearing her son speak about her like she was a danger, that was a wound she didn't know how to bandage. As the last paramedic pushed the stretcher through the door, Zanil stood alone in a house full of people. Yet she had never felt more betrayed, more abandoned, or more painfully aware of how close she had come to dying at her own family's table. Zanil drove home with trembling hands, barely remembering the roads she had taken. The night air felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if it carried the weight of everything she had just survived. Inside her house, she didn't even bother turning on the lights at first. She stood there in the dark, breathing slowly, trying to calm the storm in her chest. But her instincts wouldn't let her rest. Something inside her whispered, "Find the truth. Don't wait. Don't trust anyone." So she turned on the lamp, sat at her old wooden desk, and began searching through the drawers filled with documents, letters, and her husband's old files. At first, she found nothing unusual, just insurance papers, land agreements, and old photographs. But then she noticed a folder she didn't remember placing there. A folder with Ayanda's handwriting on the front, labeled Farm Plan. Her heart skipped. Inside were printed emails, not one or two, dozens. Email chains between Ayanda and her brother Sibusiso. Zanil read each one slowly, her hands shaking as she held the papers. They weren't just talking about the land. They were planning around it. Ayanda had written lines like, "Once we secure the mineral rights, we won't have to deal with her controlling everything. We need her signature. Or find another way." And one that made Zanil feel physically sick. "We might need to push Zanil into early retirement. Permanently." Zanil pressed a hand over her mouth. She wasn't imagining anything. They had been plotting. Carefully, quietly, with full intention. She kept digging through the folder. More documents, more plans, more evidence that Ayanda and her brother were preparing to take the land by force if necessary. She flipped page after page until something thin and crumpled fell out onto the desk. A receipt. A receipt from a chemical supplier in Johannesburg. At first, she didn't understand. Then she recognized the name of one of the chemicals, a compound she had once heard mentioned on a TV documentary about poison cases. The receipt listed ingredients often found in strong household cleaners, but also known for being mixed into toxic solutions. Her breath left her body in a sharp exhale. It was all here. The motive, the plan, the proof that Ayanda had bought exactly what could have been placed in that wine glass. The irony burned through her. Ayanda was in the hospital because she drank her own trap. Zanil leaned back in her chair, staring at the documents spread around her like shattered pieces of her life. The truth was clear now, painfully clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't anger. It wasn't even greed alone. It was a full, deliberate attempt to remove her. And if she hadn't switched those glasses, she would be the one lying in a hospital bed tonight, or worse. The realization hit her with cold clarity. They didn't just want the farm. They wanted a future without her in it. Now she finally had proof, and she knew exactly what she needed to do next. Zanil didn't sleep that night. She sat at the dining table with the evidence spread out in front of her. Emails, receipts, printed messages. Each one a painful reminder that the people she trusted had planned something unforgivable. By sunrise, she knew she couldn't carry this alone. She needed help from people who would believe her, people who knew how dangerous situations like this could become. The first person she called was Nkumisa Dube, her late husband's cousin. Nkumisa wasn't just family. She had been a respected police investigator for years before retiring. She had a sharp mind, a calm voice, and a way of seeing through lies like glass. When she picked up the phone, she immediately sensed something was wrong. "Nkumi," Zanil whispered, her voice shaking. I need you. I'm on my way," Nkumisa replied without hesitation. Within an hour, she arrived at Zanil's home, still in her tracksuit, hair tied back, notebook already in hand like muscle memory. Zanil explained everything, from the uneasy dinner to the glass switch, to Ayanda collapsing, to the horrifying evidence she found afterward. She pushed the documents toward her, and Nkumisa read through them slowly, her face tightening with every line. "This is bad," she finally said. "Very bad." Before Zanil could respond, Nkumisa added something that sent a cold wave through her. "If Ayanda dies from that poisoning, they won't just suspect you, they'll try to make sure you're charged. You were the only one who refused to drink. You're the one with the supposed motive. And Thabani is already blaming you." Zanil felt her heart sink deeper. She had thought the poisoning was the worst thing, but now she realized the trap was bigger than she imagined. Even survival could be turned into guilt. Trying to steady herself, she reached for her phone again. This time, she called Tawanda Chisengo, her lawyer from Harare. He was the one who helped her update her will and secure the mineral rights so no one could manipulate them behind her back. Tawanda listened quietly as she explained everything, his voice firm when he finally spoke. "Zanil, you did the right thing calling me. Do not talk to the police alone. Do not speak to Thabani. Do not confront Ayanda's family. Every word you say now matters." He asked her to scan and send every piece of evidence so he could prepare a legal strategy. "This was planned," he said matter-of-factly, "and that means we can prove it. But you must move carefully. They will try to twist the story." After the call, Zanil sat back in her chair, exhausted. She had two strong allies beside her, but the danger still felt real, heavy, and close. Ayanda was in a hospital bed fighting for her. Thabani was blaming his own mother without hesitation. And the world would believe whatever story they heard first. For the first time, Zanil realized she wasn't just dealing with betrayal. She was fighting to protect her freedom, her reputation, and her very life. She wasn't safe yet. Not even close. Milpark Hospital smelled like disinfectant and quiet fear. Zanil walked down the long corridor with slow, careful steps, her heart beating so loudly she felt it in her. She didn't know why she had come, maybe for answers, maybe for closure, but something inside her told her she needed to look Ayanda in the. When she reached the room number the nurse had given her, she paused at the door. Through the small window, she saw Ayanda lying on the bed, pale and weak, her eyes half open, her hands trembling on top of the blanket. The confident, glamorous woman who had smiled all evening was gone. In her place was someone terrified of her own shadow. Zanil pushed the door open gently. Ayanda's eyes flicked toward the sound, and for a second, pure panic flashed across her face. She tried to sit up but winced in pain. Her breathing grew uneven. Zanil lifted her hands slightly. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm not here to fight." The room was quiet except for the beeping of machines. Zanil stepped closer until she could see the fear in Ayanda's eyes. Fear not of the poisoning, but of being caught. Ayanda swallowed hard and whispered, her voice thin and shaking. You were supposed to drink it." Those 7 words felt like a punch right to Zanil's chest. There it was, the truth. Not an accident, not a misunderstanding, not paranoia. A plan, a deliberate attempt to end her life. Zanil's knees weakened, but she forced herself to stay standing. She wanted to ask why. How could you do this? Was Thabani part of it? But Ayanda looked so fragile, so nervous, that Zanil suddenly felt nauseous. This woman had tried to kill her, yet now lay terrified of the consequences of her own actions. Before Zanil could say a single word, the door burst open. Thabani stormed in like a thunder cloud, angry, restless, sweating. His eyes locked on Zanil with pure hostility. "What are you doing here?" he snapped. "Get out." Zanil blinked, stunned. "Thabani, I said get out," he shouted, stepping between her and Ayanda like a guard protecting a criminal. Ayanda flinched at his voice, shrinking into the bed. That reaction alone made Zanil's heart twist. Something was wrong between them. Very wrong. Zanil noticed the way Thabani avoided looking at Ayanda directly, how he kept wiping his palms on his jeans, how his jaw tightened every few seconds. He wasn't acting like a worried husband. He was acting like a man terrified the truth might spill out. And then it hit her. Ayanda hadn't planned this alone. Thabani wasn't innocent. The marriage she once believed was loving and supportive was nothing but a stage. 2 people united not by love, but by greed. As Zanil stepped out of the room, Thabani slammed the door behind her so hard the hallway echoed. She stood there for a moment, breathing deeply, her hands cold. She had come for answers. She got more than she expected. Ayanda confirmed the plan, but Thabani's reaction confirmed something even darker. He had been part of it all along. Her own son had helped plan her death. The next morning, Zanil sat in her living room with Nkumasa, both of them surrounded by documents, printed emails, and the terrible receipt that proved everything. Nkumasa didn't waste time. She called her former colleagues in the police force, people who trusted her judgment and knew she never exaggerated danger. Her tone was firm, calm, and professional as she explained the situation and sent them copies of the evidence. "Stay inside," she told Zanil. "Today, things are going to move very fast." And she was right. Before noon, 2 police vehicles pulled up at the Moyo home in Johannesburg. Not quietly, not secretly. They arrived with authority, uniforms, badges, and purpose. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Workers cleaning nearby stopped what they were doing. Everyone knew something serious was happening. Inside the house, the Bonnie was pacing back and forth, phone in hand, shouting instructions to someone. Ayanda, freshly discharged from the hospital but still weak, sat on the couch, trembling every few minutes like her body remembered the poison more than she wanted to. When the police knocked, they didn't wait politely. They stepped inside with confidence. "Ms. Ayanda Ndlovu? Mr. Thabani Moyo? We need to ask you some questions regarding the events from last night." Thabani tried to act calm, but his voice wavered. "About my wife's poisoning?" "Yes, of course. It was my mother. She." One of the officers raised a hand. "We have documents that suggest otherwise. We will need statements from both of you." Ayanda's entire body stiffened. Thabani's face drained of color. The officers presented the printed emails. Emails Ayanda had written, discussing plans to remove Zanil as an obstacle, and the chemical receipt linked to her brother's supply purchases. Ayanda's breathing grew shaky. Her eyes darted around the room. Her hands clutched the couch cushions. "Ayanda," the officer said gently, "you should know that withholding the truth will only make things worse." Under pressure, her mask cracked. Tears spilled instantly, and she shook her head violently, unable to hold everything in anymore. "It was supposed to be easy," she sobbed. "She wasn't meant to live forever. The land, the money, we needed it. Sibusiso helped, and Thabani knew everything." Thabani spun toward her. "Ayanda, what are you doing? Stop talking." But she couldn't stop. The fear and guilt were too heavy. She switched the glasses. She wasn't supposed to. It was meant for her, not me. "Ayanda!" Thabani yelled again, but it was useless. The officers scribbled notes rapidly. Another officer approached Thabani. "Sir, we also ran a forensic test on the wine glasses retrieved from the dinner table. The chemical residue matches the compound purchased using your brother-in-law's account." Thabani's mouth fell open. No, this is wrong. I didn't." He looked around, desperate, searching for an escape that didn't exist. "She's lying. My wife is confused." But Ayanda shook her head, crying harder. No, I'm not. You told me to do it. You said it was the only way." The room erupted. Police questioning. Ayanda sobbing. Thabani shouting. Officers restraining him as he tried to storm toward her. Servants watching from doorways with wide eyes. Neighbors gathering outside as rumors flew like sparks. For the second time in days, the Moyo house was drowning in chaos. But this time, the chaos wasn't about hiding a crime. This time, justice had walked through the front door, loud, undeniable, and unstoppable. The courtroom in Johannesburg was packed so tightly that people were standing along the walls, whispering and craning their necks just to get a glimpse of the family at the center of the scandal. Zanil sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly together, her heart steady but heavy. Months earlier, she had walked into Thanksgiving thinking she would share a meal with family. Now she was watching her own son and his wife face charges that could put them behind bars for years. Thabani walked in wearing a wrinkled suit, his eyes darting everywhere except toward his mother. Ayanda followed, looking pale and nervous, her hands trembling as she tried to look calm. But nothing could hide the truth now. The charges were read out clearly: attempted murder, conspiracy to defraud, property manipulation. Each word echoed through the courtroom like a drumbeat. Some people gasped quietly, some shook their heads. Even the judge raised his eyebrows for a moment before continuing. When it was Zanil's turn to speak, she stood slowly, taking a deep breath. Her voice didn't shake. She told the court everything she had seen, everything she had survived, and everything she had uncovered. She presented the messages Ayanda had sent behind her back. She showed the screenshots of threats and the invoices for the strange mineral farm document. She explained how the house, the land, and even her finances had been manipulated without her knowledge. Every detail landed in the courtroom like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples of shock everywhere. But the real explosion came when the prosecutor played the audio recording. The room fell silent, so quiet that you could hear someone coughing outside the hallway. Then Ayanda's voice filled the speakers, clear, sharp, and unmistakable. She was arguing with Sibusiso, planning how and when to slip the chemical mixture into Zanil's drink. They talked about the property transfer, the forged signatures, and how they would sell the mineral-rich land once everything was in their name. They laughed about how old people don't ask questions. They even mentioned what story they would tell the police if things went wrong. People in the courtroom covered their mouths. Others whispered, "Yo, can you imagine?" Someone in the back muttered, "This is wickedness." The judge's face hardened. Even Ayanda started crying, shaking her head like she didn't recognize her own voice. But the biggest reaction came from Thabani. For the first time since the arrest, he looked small, broken. Not because he regretted anything, but because he realized he could no longer escape responsibility. His shoulders slumped, and his face changed from arrogance to panic. He finally understood. His mother hadn't just brought family drama to court. She brought proof, witnesses, recordings, and a timeline that tied him to every part of the plan. Ayanda whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. He stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, sweat forming at his temples. The courtroom could practically smell the fear. By the time the audio ended, there was no doubt left, no confusion, no lies that could save them. The truth had been spoken out loud, and it hit the courtroom like a bomb. The courtroom felt colder when the judge returned with the final decision. Everyone sat up straight, waiting, barely breathing. Ayanda dabbed her eyes with a tissue, her legs shaking so badly she could hardly stand. Thabani looked stiff, like he was carved from stone. But Zanil, she just sat quietly, holding her handbag like it was the only stable thing left in her. When the judge began reading the sentence, the room fell into a pin-drop silence. Ayanda was sentenced to several years in prison, not just for attempted murder, but for planning it with intention, for trying to poison a woman who trusted her. The judge didn't soften his voice. He made it clear this wasn't just a family misunderstanding. It was a calculated crime. A crime that could have ended a life. Ayanda's face crumbled. She sobbed loudly, her tears streaming as officers came forward to escort her away. She didn't look at Zanil. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She was too busy trying to convince the guard that she didn't belong in handcuffs. But the evidence had spoken louder than any tears she could ever shed. Then came Thabani's turn. His voice cracked when the judge listed the charges: conspiracy, fraud, and property manipulation. The attempted murder charge stayed with Ayanda, but Thabani wasn't walking out free. His role in planning, organizing documents, and helping cover up the scheme tied him directly to the conspiracy. The judge spoke firmly, reminding him that betrayal from a child is one of the deepest wounds a parent can face, and that the law had no room for "I didn't know" when the recordings and documents told a different story. Thabani's shoulders dropped completely. For a moment, he looked like a scared little boy, not the grown man who had laughed while plotting to steal from his own mother. He didn't look back at Zanil as he was led away. Shame glued his eyes to the floor. When it was all over, the courtroom slowly emptied, leaving only echoes of whispers behind. Zanil stood up very slowly, like the weight of everything that had just happened was sitting on her chest. People came up to her, some hugged her, some shook their heads in disbelief, some whispered, "You're so strong." But she barely heard any of it. She walked out of the courtroom alone. Outside, the Johannesburg air felt heavy. The sun was bright, but she didn't feel the warmth. She stopped on the courthouse steps and just breathed. One long, shaky breath that carried months of fear, shock, betrayal, and heartbreak. Yes, she had won the case. Yes, justice had been served. Yes, she had survived something that should have killed her. But she had lost a son. The silence around her suddenly felt louder than any courtroom gasps. Cars drove by, people chatted on their phones, birds flew overhead. But inside her, everything was quiet. Quiet in a way that only grief can create. She put a hand over her heart and closed her eyes. She wasn't proud. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't angry. She was simply surviving. And in that silence, she realized something painfully true. Sometimes saving your own life means losing someone you once loved more than anything. She wiped a tear, lifted her chin gently, and walked down those steps. Not victorious, not defeated, but alive. The sun was just rising over the rolling hills of KwaZulu-Natal as Zanil stepped out onto her farm. The air smelled of fresh earth and early morning dew, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of peace. Her grandchildren ran around her, laughing and shouting as they chased chickens and rolled in the grass. Their joy was infectious, and Zanil couldn't help but smile, feeling warmth fill the cracks left by the past months of betrayal and fear. Walking through the farm, she ran her hands over the old wooden fence and the fields her husband had loved so much. This land wasn't just soil and grass. It was a legacy, a place built on love, hard work, and dreams for the future. That legacy had been threatened, almost stolen, but she had survived. And now, she would ensure it remained a place of growth, hope, and family for generations to come. Zanil gathered her grandchildren near the barn and told them her plan. She wanted to build a youth agricultural center in her late husband's honor, a place where young people could learn to farm, care for the land, and understand the value of hard work. She wanted them to know that the earth gives back what you put into it, that integrity and truth always matter, and that family isn't just about blood but about love and responsibility. Standing on the hill, looking out over the fields, Zenil whispered to herself, "I survived what they planned for me. Not because I was stronger, but because truth always rises." Her story quickly spread across South Africa. People weren't drawn to the scandal, the drama, or the betrayal. They were inspired by her courage, her wisdom, and her refusal to let greed and cruelty define her life. She became a symbol of resilience, a mother who protected her legacy, her family, and her values. And in that quiet morning, surrounded by her grandchildren, Zenil finally felt whole, knowing she had turned pain into purpose and preserved a future worth fighting for.